In 1992, Nintendo would release Kirby's Dreamland, an action-adventure game that featured a pink puffball named Kirby, who set off to restore peace to Dreamland after King Dedede stole all of Dreamland's food. The game would skyrocket into popularity, resulting in Kirby becoming one of Nintendo's main mascots, with Kirby being featured in many spin-off games and being one of the main characters in the Super Smash Bros. Series. However, in the nearly 35 years that Kirby has been around, it's only natural that certain pieces of Kirby media have gone undocumented and have become lost. So today, I wanted to take a look at some instances of Kirby lost media. Kid Kirby. Kid Kirby was a cancelled Super Nintendo game developed by DMA Design, LT, and Nintendo during the 1990s. The game would feature the use of the Super Nintendo mouse, an add-on for the Super Nintendo that would allow the user to use a mouse on the console. The game would have followed a young version of Kirby exploring Dreamland, with the player being able to grab Kirby and use the Super Nintendo mouse to fling him around. However, the project was ultimately cancelled due to slow development and poor sales of the Super Nintendo mouse, resulting in the game being scrapped. This would result in a lost media wiki user getting into contact with Mike Daly, a developer on the game who revealed old concept art and would claim that at one point a demo existed, however it has since gone missing. And other than the information given to us by Mike Daly, not much else is known about the game, and this demo has never resurfaced online. Kirby phone number. In December of 1993, a Japanese educational magazine named Second Grade would feature ads for an official Kirby phone number. Calling the number would allow the callers to talk to Kirby. The calls would last no longer than 1 minute and is often remembered fondly by individuals who called in. The phone line was up for the full month of December, and on December 29th of 1993, the phone line was shut down, with Kirby announcing through another ad that he had been using King Dedede's phone and apologizing for not answering everyone's calls. Since being discontinued, no recorded calls have resurfaced, and it's unknown who voiced Kirby during these calls. Kirby 64 cancelled build. Kirby and the Crystal Shards was a 2D platformer released on the Nintendo 64 in March of 2000. However, the game had been in development since 1997. During an interview before the release of Crystal Shards, Takashi Saito, a lead game designer behind the game, would reveal a demo cartridge from October of 1997. Takashi would explain that the demo was made to see what it would be like if Kirby's Dreamland was made into a 3D map. And from what we know, this demo was nearly fully complete. However, it was never released due to the team believing that they could improve more from this idea. Not much else is known about the demo other than that it was just a demo, and it is unclear if the game was a 3D side-scroller like Crystal Shards or if it was more similar to Mario 64. Since this interview, the demo has never been mentioned, and the demo has never resurfaced online. Kirby Bowl 64 and Kirby Air Ride 64. Kirby Bowl 64 was an unreleased prototype which would have been a sequel to Kirby's Dream Course on the Super Nintendo, which would eventually be reworked into Kirby's Air Ride for the GameCube. During the launch of the Nintendo 64, Nintendo would announce Kirby Bowl, a 3D version of Kirby's Dream Course which would allow the player to putt Kirby around like a golf ball in a 3D space. The game would be shown off during Space World 1995, however, when the Nintendo 64 finally released, news about Kirby Bowl went completely silent and it was never released. To this day, the game has not resurfaced online, and I think it's likely that it was just a tech demo to show off what the Nintendo 64 could do. And after the quiet discontinuation of Kirby Bowl, HAL Laboratories would continue with an idea of a Kirby racing game titled Kirby Air Ride. This idea would eventually be featured as a demo during E3 1996. Early footage from the event would show Kirby flying around Dreamland on his Warp Star racing King Dedede. The footage would also show Kirby with a backwards baseball cap doing tricks. However, since E3 1996, the demo has never resurfaced, but both of these demos would be implemented into Kirby's Air Ride for the GameCube. Kirby Tilt and Tumble 2. Kirby Tilt and Tumble 2 was a planned sequel to the 2000s puzzle game that was released on the Game Boy Color. Tilt and Tumble 2 would have incorporated the GameCube link cable, which allowed the GameCube to hook up to the Game Boy Advance. This would have allowed the player to use the Game Boy Advance as a sort of controller, while the game would have been displayed through the GameCube. The gameplay would have been the player attempting to navigate Kirby through various obstacles, and if Kirby fell off the map, then he would appear on the Game Boy Advance screen. However, by 2002, the game would be renamed Roll-O-Rama and would remove all Kirby-related elements from the game, replacing them with generic shapes. And after that, not much was heard about the game, with it most likely being cancelled quietly in the background due to the GameCube and Game Boy Advance hookup for the game being too difficult to do. However, in 2022, Kirby's Dream Buffet, a 3D puzzle racing game that looks very similar to the ideas present in Tilt and Tumble 2, was released. Kirby's Return to Dreamland Beta. After the release of Kirby and the Crystal Shards, the mainline Kirby series would take a near 10-year hiatus. However, on October 24th, 2011, Kirby Return to Dreamland would be released. However, in the nearly 10 years that Kirby had been in development, many ideas or even whole games were scrapped. Firstly, we have Kirby Adventure, a planned title on the GameCube announced during E3 2005. This short trailer would show off a gameplay style similar to Crystal Shards. However, this trailer would also show off multiplayer, allowing players to also play as Kirby's enemies similar to Kirby Superstar. This trailer would also feature a new Kābī ability, that being Water, which would make it into the final 2011 release of Kirby's Return to Dreamland. However, this game would ultimately be cancelled due to developers not thinking it was high quality enough. Secondly, we have Kirby of the Stars, a Wii title that appeared in a list of upcoming Wii games for 2006. The game would have reportedly featured more open world-like gameplay, however, due to overly challenging gameplay and quality issues, Kirby and the Stars was scrapped. Then thirdly, we have a untitled platformer that was more in line with Kirby's roots, with it reportedly being a side-scroller. The game would have featured a pop-up book art style, however, due to unknown reasons, the game was cancelled. And after the cancellation of these three prototypes, the Kirby team would take what they enjoyed from all three of these cancelled titles and make Kirby's Return to Dreamland. And most of these scrap games would get their ideas used later on in the series. Like Kirby Adventure, the E3 2005 trailer getting Star Allies, which allowed Kirby to befriend his enemies just like in that trailer. Or Kirby of the Stars being an open world would ultimately be used in Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And the untitled platformer with a pop-up book art style would get used in Kirby's Epic Yarn. However, aside from these trailers and screenshots, not much else is known about these scrapped games. Kirby Right Back At Ya, Shell Shocked. Kirby Right Back At Ya was an anime adaptation of the Kirby franchise released in 2002. The anime followed Kirby, who crash lands on planet Popstar, and every episode would face a new monster, which were summoned by King DDD. However, for a long amount of time, episode 88 of the English dub was lost. The episode followed S-Cargoon, King DDD's loyal assistant, breaking his shell and transforming into a big monster. The episode was set to premiere on June 11, 2005, however was delayed due to that night's baseball game being delayed, resulting in it airing once in 2006. This would result in the episode becoming lost for a good amount of time. However, in 2015, a YouTuber named Operation Hoshino Kābī would upload the episode in full. However, this upload would later get taken down by Nintendo for copyright. However, luckily, the episode was saved on Dailymotion and is still available to watch today. Kirby Family. Back in Space World 2001, Nintendo would announce one of their newest projects, which would have been a collaboration between Jaguar, a sewing machine company. This collaboration would result in Kirby Family, a Game Boy Color game which would allow the player to see different prints for Kirby. And if you had the special embroidery machine developed by Jaguar, then you could electronically send Kirby prints to be embroidered. The game would be shown off in Space World 2001, however, due to bad sales of Mario Family, another game in a similar style, it was most likely cancelled. However, in 2020 on 4chan, a archive titled Platinum Z would reveal a fully functioning release version of the game, which was even still compatible with the embroidery machine. And that was the end of the video. Thank you all for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe. It really supports me and it shows me what content you guys enjoy. And make sure to leave a comment about what other topics you guys want to see me talk about. But anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!